I'm Professor Elizabeth Miner. I'll be talking today about the archaeology project that I'm leading on campus. As maybe a few more people are coming in, I'm going to send around a sign up for our project's mailing list if you'd like to get email updates about what we're going to go excavate directly after this. You may tell by the way I'm dressed. So if you want to be in the loop as to what we're finding this fall, you can pass this around. So how many of you are here because you've heard about our project already? And how did you hear about it? You can shout it out.
My daughter's one of your students.
Oh, okay. McKenna. Yes. She told me you'd be coming. How many of you heard about us through, yeah, go ahead. In the Wellesley News? Okay, yeah. And have any of you seen it in the alumni magazine? Great. And the Daily Shot? Oh, some of you, yeah. I've been joking, like, do I win a special prize if I provide a whole week's worth of daily shots for Wellesley? I'm not sure yet. That's great. I'm glad to hear that there's a lot of different ways that you are all learning about our project, and that's one of the goals that I'll talk about today. The project is based on community-based participatory research, so trying to connect with current students, alumni, faculty, staff, people who are part of the Wellesley community, and finding ways to get them engaged with kind of building different understandings of our history as an institution. So I'll start off today talking about just archaeology very briefly in general, and then jump into the details about the project, talk a little bit about our methodologies, and then show some of the finds that we've made, especially last summer. I have not talked in this room before, so let me see how this wants to work. Okay. So first of all, what is archaeology? We have a lot of romantic ideals about what the actual methodologies are. I have pondered a lot of objects, but I've never pondered one in the middle of trying to steal it from the middle of a dangerous temple, such as with Indiana Jones. The actual reality of archaeology is usually very slow, tedious work sitting in a pit, kind of questioning why you went into this in the first place. So this is an example of a graduate student, Tommy, who's working in Sudan in one of the field sites that I've participated in. And so you can see, as opposed to looking for golden idols and exciting things like that, we do very thorough recording of everything in an archaeological context. So he has all of his equipment out, he's carefully labeling the different layers of sand, like Nile sand in this case, and taking notes, and each layer has contained different artifacts, so we're looking at the sequence over time in order to reconstruct both the environmental and human history at the site. We think a lot about stratigraphy, layers over time, kind of like a pile of laundry or a pile of mail. The stuff that's older is further down at the bottom. And I am an archaeologist who works primarily in Egypt and in Sudan. I do a full range of types of archaeology, anything from survey to actual excavation. One of my main specialties is working with small finds like jewelry, personal adornments, so documenting all of the objects fully, and also a lot of museum-based research. There's very interesting material that was collected over 100 years ago that is sitting in museum basements. This is me in the National Museum in Khartoum doing research. So there's new information that can be gleaned from excavation, and also a lot of information that's already been partially documented but can be looked at again and kind of reassessed. People are usually very curious about what it's like to be an archaeologist. I travel a lot, again, especially to Egypt and Sudan. These are some, do I have my cursor? It's not. Okay, so on the On the left are some examples from Sudan. You can see that cultural heritage management is a very interesting part of archaeology. So here is the site of Kerma, which is the time period that I study. On New Year's Day, there was a huge festival, and people from all throughout Sudan have come to kind of enjoy this ancient city and kind of connect with their own heritage. And also public outreach. So these schoolgirls are looking at a pamphlet that we made for elementary schools in the area where we're working in Sudan. They look kind of skeptical in this picture, but I assure you that they had much more fun than it looks like they're having. And so the pamphlet was to give them information about our project and what we'd been finding, but also kind of teach them about the importance of preservation and what to do in case someone in their family came across an ancient site or burial, which worked. Someone's uncle was in his fields plowing, found a burial, told one of our excavators who told us, and we were able to do salvage archaeology. And then also Egypt. So many of you have seen pictures of the Sphinx, and you have kind of a romantic idea of what it's like, but this is what it's actually like to be on the ground there with crowds of tourists, people selling camels. A large tourist actually fell on me right after I took this picture. So the realities of archaeology, it's not just the recording and the research that we do, but it's also finding ways to connect with communities, people who are involved in the material that you're studying. So that's what we're setting out to do here at Wellesley. So how many of you can tell where this is? It's a pretty iconic spot. It's kind of like our Sphinx or Great Pyramid. Did any of you live in Tower Court? Some of you do now. Did any of you see us working? Make my students go out in the rain like today. So here we are starting one of the units in the Tower Court courtyard, and why would we be digging here besides just to annoy the students that are trying to take a nap on a Saturday afternoon? Does anyone know what used to be there? So the original building for Wellesley was directly on this site. So this is the atrium. The main entrance, you'd come in, it's four stories of this large atrium with plants in it. That was sort of the centerpiece of this massive building. It was one of the largest buildings in Massachusetts at the time when it was built. And so this was the hub for the beginning of Wellesley as an institution. It had everything from dorm rooms to classrooms to a library to the dining hall to a natural history museum, everything all in one massive and beautiful building. It kind of reminds me of the Isabella Stewart Gardner atrium in a way. But that burnt down overnight on March 17th, 1914. No one was hurt, and many objects were actually saved by students in particular and faculty as the fire burned, but a mass majority of the items and the architecture were lost, and the building was left in ruins. So you can see Normbega Cottage is roughly similar to where we are right now, kind of the edge of the academic quad. So imagine looking out over to where Tower Court is now, on top of Severance Hill. And you can see the building was almost 500 feet long, and mostly brick, but then the top roof and that kind of decorative stuff is wood. So you can imagine once the fire started, not entirely sure how it started. It's rumored there were biological laboratories and a professor who had beetles that needed to be warmed. So she had sort of an electronic warming contraption that was often blamed to start the start of the fire. But it was probably in one of the scientific labs. And you can imagine formaldehyde, all sorts of different kind of remnants of gas lighting, lots of possibilities of how the fire started. And the students were very on top of fire safety. They had done fire drills in the past. And in the center of the atrium, there was a bronze Japanese bell, a giant kind of temple gong. And so the first students who realized that the building was on fire went over and started ringing the bell really loudly. And so everyone thought it was a fire drill at first, started lining up, and then realized that it was an actual fire. The newspaper clippings from the time are interesting. One of the reasons the building burnt was the fire equipment was faulty. They couldn't get proper pressure in the fires. And one of the workmen said that if the equipment had been working, the students could have put the fire out themselves. They were that prepared and ready to go. But again, luckily no one was hurt, everyone was accounted for, but it was a massively traumatic moment in Wellesley's history. Classes were only shut down for 2 or 3 weeks. The graduating class of 1914 were able to complete their studies and graduate, and students moved into some of the dorms, especially the residential quad, were being built at that time, so they were able to move there, or into the Ville. There was kind of more housing available there. And the campus started an amazing fundraising campaign to raise the funds to build Tower Court and kind of start over. But it was scary. There was a possibility that Wellesley could not come back from this tragedy. So we know this sort of like ghost of a building is still on campus. It lives in our memories, and we're left with kind of questions as to what we could learn from this destruction. So here's a plan of College Hall, and you can see on the far side, it says terrace, and so the lake is off in that direction. There was a very large circle drive that led to the front, and again, I keep on getting hints of no, it's not participating. In the middle, you can see where the atrium was originally. So as archaeologists, this is great. We have a plan that gives us an idea of where things might have been, but it's first thing we had to figure out exactly how to map this onto the existing landscape. So this is a Google Earth overhead shot with an overlay of the plan, and especially looking at this, the terrace and knowing the slope of the hill, we were able to kind of see that the building was likely set further back towards the lake than today's Tower Court. And interestingly, you can see 2 of the main wings of College Hall kind of fit up with Claflin and Severance, and possibly there was some sort of reuse of the foundations too. So, and then on the far side, there's this little outbuilding, and that was a kitchen. It didn't burn down. Ironically, it had a firewall. It makes sense. A kitchen is the most likely place for a fire to start. So actually, and that's also where the servants' quarters were. That was preserved and used for some science laboratories after the fire, but now is, there's sort of a hill as you're driving down to the lake house parking lot. That's probably matches up with that building. We want to excavate there. It's going to be kind of difficult because it's a steep hill and there's a lot of landscaping. So the 4 stars are the original locations we chose to excavate to kind of test out if this layout was correct, and to see how far down the destruction layers would be and what material we could find. So this is the first season we did just about a year ago. And so here the students are happily working away despite the cold, and kind of investigating the potentials in those different areas. The first season of any archaeology usually involves kind of trial and error. You're not going to find as much as maybe you would want to, and it's always the case that it's the last day of a season that you find the most interesting thing that provides the motivation to go back out and start excavating again. This is the courtyard unit, and so the student with the coffee, she was walking by and she was curious to find out what we were working on. We always try to be open to these kind of like moments of connection with the people who live nearby, whether working abroad or in our own backyards. So we also wanted to poll the current Wellesley community and find out what research questions they had. What were they interested in learning about Wellesley's past? My students, I think there was about 20 students in this original class. They came up with their own ideas and questions, but we wanted to see if that fit in, was representative of the Wellesley community as a whole. So the main questions that stood out in the survey that we sent, people were curious about how we were going to excavate, how deep we would dig, what archaeological evidence we're standing on ourselves, what will happen to the finds afterwards, what we'll find, and how the finds will be used for research and display. We also asked them what they thought we might find. Some of them were spot on. Rusty nails. Yes, my office is full of rusty nails right now. Fabric scraps. We haven't found any any sort of organic material, mostly, that would have been destroyed by the fire. Bricks, so many bricks, and a lot of broken and melted glass. You'll see in a second, interestingly, we haven't found anything that was probably from a dorm room. It's possible that we're still kind of in the upper layers, but one student in particular is really interested in vintage fashion, and she's highly motivated to find even just a button. So we're still hoping for that. Let's see if this wants to work for me. There we go. Okay, so we're also mapping the excavation area. So here we are with librarian Sarah Hoskins, who is our resident GIS and drone expert. So we're using a drone this summer to fly up over, at this point the dorm was empty, to fly in a pattern over it and then create a 3D model. Nope. There you go. Of the hill area, which we still need to work on. It got very confused by the tower. We think we need to kind of take more aerial photos there. So this is helping us assess. You can see our excavation unit right here. Be able to put together the finds here, 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 and over here, and get an idea. This is basically now a 3D model of the hill that we're able to put things in different contexts and see kind of what's happening underneath the hill. Okay, and here's some examples of our process actually excavating. So after determining the general area to excavate, we laid out 1 by 1 meter units. There's a lot of science to archaeology, and there's a lot of luck to archaeology too. So when you're actually placing these units, I hand the first stake to the students and ask who's feeling the luckiest that day, and they get to decide exactly where to put it. You'll see in a second, sometimes you can be just a few centimeters away from something really interesting and just have no idea. There are ways you can do remote sensing, especially with ground penetrating radar or magnetometry. In our case, the debris is so jumbled that I don't think it would give us the kind of any sort of useful resolution. Also, we would do soil augering. So this is sort of like a short preview going down. If you were excavating, say, where there's burials that you would disturb, you wouldn't use this, but it's sort of like a little plug of dirt that gives you a preview of what might be there. And then we start digging. Okay. So one of the interesting things is kind of, again, a snapshot of Wellesley history from more recent to further back in time. So we're interested to see what kind of modern activities happen in this area of the Wellesley campus. So what do you predict we would find about what students are doing currently? What sort of everyday life things? What do students do behind dorms? Do they eat things? What kind of evidence of consumption would we find? Starbucks cups? What about gum wrappers? What about other types of consumption that maybe your cigarette butts? Bottle caps? You're pretty much spot on. We haven't found any Starbucks cups, actually. So this is, these are the first finds from the dig. Oh, now this is working. Okay, a Trader Jose beer cap, lots and lots of cigarette filters. We were kind of, and we're also curious, okay, so this is a women's college. Would the finds reflect that kind of gendered situation? We actually have found several pieces of like face wash. This is clean and clear, and kind of hygiene items. And then what is this? It's a golf tee. And what color is it? It's hot pink. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a breast cancer awareness thing, but it's interesting that it's evidence of recreational activity, but it's kind of aggressively gendered as female. Okay, and then again, in process of going, yeah, these lights are a little hard to see, but there's different layers of colors of soil that we're recording as we go down and consulting with the students as to what they want to do next in terms of excavation. And that's what's happening here with these, they're not chopsticks, but like skewers. They've put them at the different layers of stratigraphy and then are recording them to get an understanding of kind of each different layer. And about 50 centimeters down is where we start finding fire debris. So here are some of the artifacts from historical periods, further back in time. So what is this? An oyster shell, and why would it be there? Yeah, this is close to the kitchen, actually. So kind of get an idea of what people were eating. We might think of oysters as being fancy now, but they were extremely common food in historical times in Massachusetts. This is kind of a stumper. It's metal and has like a screw thread on it. It's probably the base of a light bulb. And this is a tiny sherd of nice blue and white ware, willow ware, which is a kind of mass-produced and very accessible type of decorative ware. And we'll see some interesting examples. This is like from a tiny bud vase, lots and lots of rusty nails, lots and lots of glass. We were thinking this was melted glass, but it's actually heating coal. We're modern people, we don't use heating coal. We had no idea what it was, but we ran elemental analysis on it and realized that's what it is. Okay, and then the students are in charge of also recording all of the artifacts, photographing them here in my office, as you can see with our high-tech setup using some VHS tapes to hold the lights. And then here the students are, you can see that they have the objects out and they're cataloging them all together in the same Google Sheet. I love teaching at Wellesley. I did this as an example of why you need to think ahead and organize things, so I just had everyone start, it was a completely blank Excel sheet that they had to start cataloging the objects in, and I thought it was going to be chaotic and not work and show why it was important to have somebody like me tell them what to do. But the Wellesley students sat and did it incredibly efficiently, wonderfully, perfectly, with all of the information I could ever think of. So now we do that all the time. They taught me something. And then also some of the artifacts we do XRF or materials analysis on. So this is showing the concentration of arsenic versus lead in some of, so we thought this was glass, now we know it's coal, glass. This glass is about, this is not 8%, but it should be parts per million. So this glass has quite a lot of lead in it, and that blue and white ware has a very significant amount of lead in it. So we know that, again, this is from historical times. Lead is very commonly used. It helps glass and glazes melt at lower temperatures, and don't worry, you would have to be eating like spaghetti or drinking lemon juice out of something like this to get lead poisoning. Okay, and then we're also comparing what we're finding on the ground with what's available in the college archives, which is quite a lot of information. So here the class has gone to visit to look especially at scrapbooks that were put together by students at the time. This one woman, Mary Cole, took incredibly detailed notes about all of her life, different parties that she went to and social events. So this says March 14th, 1913. Looks like it's Beatrice Fisher's birthday party, and she saved the candles from the cake. And there's also a lot of snapshots from students at the time of the fire in progress. So you can see, and here's sort of a pile of furniture that folks in the area have pulled from the fire started at one end of the building, so they're able to, especially from the side towards Severance Hill, they're able to salvage furniture. This was a surprise. So we use trowels just like this to excavate, but again, Wellesley being Wellesley, this is a silver trowel with an ivory handle that was used to set the cornerstone of Tower Court when it was built. They wouldn't let me take it to use for excavation. I was very sad. And then objects that were used in College Hall. This is a key to one of the former president's rooms, and it, I think it's room 230 is the room, and we confirmed, yeah, that is the room that this former president lived in. Here are the official dining hall plates that have Wellesley emblazoned on them, and this is blue wedgwood that was used as water pitchers in the dining hall. So as kind of a comparison, so those are kind of the special objects that were saved, but we get an idea of kind of the daily life side of things instead through archaeology. So this is a key that we found in the courtyard, and again, it's a similar pattern, but this is of a type that is much more kind of commercially accessible. This key is also interesting because it is a key to a sardine can or some sort of can like that. And here's an example. I'm sure you recognize this Willowware immediately. So what's kind of interesting, again, these like generational shifts. I have eaten sardines like this, but I don't think any of my students have. I cannot find a sardine can that needs a key commercially anymore. So there's an interesting kind of understanding of the past. Why would you need that? One student has, I guess, used them to open spam in the past also. And what's interesting, okay, students weren't allowed to have food in their dorms, except for fruit, which was highly controversial. So these are like contraband sardines, in fact, that someone was eating. Okay, so after this kind of first round of excavation, we did more community outreach, especially at the Davis Museum. And if you're interested, next weekend is on Saturdays, International Archaeology Day, and we'll be back there again with some of the finds. And we've had a really great community response to all of our surveys and kind of email updates. Usually people don't want to be added to mailing lists. We've had incredibly high responses of people wanting to continue to get emails, come to lectures and events, and come volunteer at the dig as well. So some of the questions that are kind of themes that the community have been interested in us exploring is the nature of socioeconomic status and diversity at Wellesley at that time, what kind of academic offerings there were, the roots of Wellesley traditions, and also diversity in terms of race and ethnicity, what life was like after Wellesley, what students did for fun, what they ate, just kind of daily life questions, clothing, activism, because this is also in the middle of the suffrage movement and in World War I, and dating life, and also gender identity. We included fire safety as kind of a joke, but people are interested in it. So one of the ways we wanted to assess on a more subconscious level of what people were interested in is through a survey that maybe some of you participated in, where we showed these archive photos and then asked people to click on what they were interested in learning about. This is the Browning Room in College Hall, and this is the Reading Girl statue, which at the time was very, very popular. And so people, you can see, were very interested in kind of the opulence of College Hall at the time. We haven't found any. There's a lot of marble and other stone statuary that would have survived the fire but maybe broken apart. So I'm still waiting to find like a marble hand reaching up out of the ground. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, but it probably won't. People were also very interested in the kind of academic activities of Wellesley. This is a chemistry lab in College Hall, and you can see people have clicked on the equipment. The one in the corner is an artifact of people scrolling on their phones. We have a lot of those, which is interesting. You'll see we did actually find some probably chemistry lab equipment. Okay. And then daily life and activities. This is a Zeta Alpha play from 1911. And people were very interested, again, in kind of gender identities at the time. So you can see they've clicked the most on the students who are dressed as male characters. And then this is the dining room in College Hall. And you can see people have clicked on some of the students in the front row. They're curious about like the dining ware and the plates. And you can see one of the water pitchers there in the background. And then see how there's this woman here, and this woman here, and this woman here that people have clicked on. Are they sitting and eating? Who are they? Yeah, they're the servants waiting to serve the food to the students. And we get kind of a glimpse of this socioeconomic divide in the archive pictures. There are some pictures of the staff and kind of mentions of chefs and different servants in some of the yearbooks and letters in particular. Okay, and then here is the gym in College Hall. And you can see people were particularly concerned of the student who was hanging from the rope at the top. She's just made it to the top. And you can see how the students on the ropes are kind of blurry. This is a reminder that we see these archival photographs as like snapshots of this historical time, but they were all very posed. Photography needed very long, like 1 or 2 minute exposures at this time. So what we're actually seeing, even though it can look, this one is probably less posed, but there's still, it's not the same as like our Instagram snaps all over campus today. We're getting a very like rigidly defined picture of the past, and that's something that archaeology can kind of give us, like the secret beer that you're drinking behind the dorm, or like all the gum that you're chewing and etc., that kind of stuff that you wouldn't write home about to your parents. Okay, so we also asked the community to tell us where they thought we should excavate next. So you can see everyone wanted us to continue in the courtyard where the atrium used to be, and then also over in the kitchen area. Again, like logistically, that's difficult, so we've kind of sidelined that for now. But also the top of Severance Hill. So this summer, we started in the courtyard and then moved over to the top of Severance. We had a lot of great community support, again, during the summer. So here, McKenna always ends up in the pictures. So here's McKenna showing the WCCC students who are around 5 or 6 years old. They came to visit and had a lot of really interesting questions for us, especially about how we do archaeology. And then here are some of the Davis summer interns, the Paulson Initiative of Place. Students also came to help us. And we have a series of community excavation days that are starting in the fall. Okay, so here are McKenna and Rachel. So we knew the top of Severance was determined to be one of the next places to excavate. And so here's one of the archive photos. That really huge tree that's on Severance Hill shows up in the archive pictures also. So we can kind of, Rachel's using that to kind of gauge where the edge of the building might have been on the top of the hill. And so we did 2 units to kind of split and see if we could figure out exactly where it had been. Oh, this is back in the courtyard. As we went down, there was more and more evidence, especially of the fire destruction. So you can see here's a brick with so much, looks like ash underneath it, but it's actually in a very nice square, and then it has nails stuck into it. So it's sort of like a remnant of a very large wooden beam that's been completely carbonized by the fire. So the wood isn't there anymore, but we can see it sort of as it stayed in the dirt. And it's just very exciting to find a brick and turn it over and find the pockets of ash from the fire. Some of the material that we find is melted, and that helps us determine the heat, possible heat of the fire. So this is kind of melted fused ceramic material that we've done analysis on, and it probably got to over 2,000 degrees in order to get to that state. The most surprising find from the summer were very small fragments of an anatomical specimen, specifically the skull fragment. Dr. Adam Van Arsdale was helping us that day. He's our physical anthropologist here on campus, and he was completely flabbergasted and came over to me. We sift all the material, and he had, like 3/4 sized fragments, and he said, "This is part of a human skull, but it has cut marks." So you can see this isn't necessarily the exact same anatomical specimen skeleton that we found pieces of, but from this archive photo from the late 1800s, we know that Wellesley had them in their collection. And so the skull is bisected so that people can study the inside of it also. So we found a piece that has that nice saw cut straight through it. So we know that it's definitely not someone who died in the fire. It's not from previously existing burial that was there. It was found well below that kind of ashy layer of destruction. So with the modifications on it, it's almost certainly one of these anatomical specimens. And it's now with the state archaeology department. When you find unmarked human remains, that's kind of the process that you go through. Then on the top of Severance Hill, we started finding kind of broken, strange metal and glass equipment. So you can see this piece as it came out of the ground. We're debating as to what it might be. Do you have any guesses? Kind of looks like a stirrup, but it's not like very nice metal. So what it likely is a hoop ring from one of these ring stands for holding like a Bunsen burner or something, or sorry, holding like a flask, a glass flask over a burner. And so the wire is there to adjust and kind of clamp down on it. And then we also found melted glassware. So this is the lid, and it actually fits, even though this is melted and smushed down, the top of a glass bottle, like the ones you can see in the background of the archive pictures too. Another very surprising find, usually in archaeology, you want to find something, you want it to be interesting, so students will bring me interesting looking rocks, and I have to break their hearts and tell them it's just a rock, it's not an artifact. But we started finding a lot of interesting rocks, including this very large, like this size, kyanite crystal, which would not be naturally occurring in this area in Wellesley. And this is a little piece of a geode, like those rocks that you crack open and there's crystals. And you can see it has glass melted onto it. So we know that it was somewhere around during the fire where glass could kind of melt, either melted down into the glass or melted onto it. And we realized we might be finding parts of a geology lab and their mineral samples. Yeah, there's a very high concentration of these minerals, and that's actually the area that we're about to start excavating again. So we seem to be in kind of the top layers of College Hall. We know that there was a chemistry and geology lab, I think it's on the 3rd or the 4th floor, and also the area directly above the atrium in the very top floor was a natural history museum where they would have had the anatomical collections. So in the case of the atrium, it seems like it sort of fell straight down and sort of pancaked, which is where we found the skull fragments. And then these are on the very top of Severance Hill, and it seems like they kind of bulldozed or tore down the building out towards that direction. And in fact, from the archive pictures, Severance Hill seems much lower originally. And so we've gone down about a meter on the top of Severance Hill, so like quite far, and that is all fill from the fire, from the destruction level. So it's possible like the top 2 meters, even 3 meters of Severance Hill is all just broken bits, melted things from College Hall. And we're hoping that further down will be where the lower levels, where the dorm rooms were, and be able to get more information about kind of students' daily life there. Okay, so if you'd like to learn more and kind of keep in touch, there's a mailing list sign up that's going around, and we also have the Archaeology Project Facebook page where you can see updates. We're also working on a video game that helps people understand like where things were found. It's used, or it's built using a program called Eris, so you can play it on your phone. It's location-based, so the actual objects that we found will show up in the place where we found them. So you can see here's the light bulb where we found it. Oops, let me show you the excavation unit. Archive key. Yeah, so there's, well, that's kind of been artificially planted because that actually belongs in the archives. But that's around where the room was. You can also run around and try to find Pendleton's dog. It will randomly show up. Here's a 3D model of our excavation square, which takes a second to load. So you can actually stand on the spot where the excavation happened, see the artifacts that we found, and even be able to kind of experience what the excavation looked like when it was open. And if you're interested in testing it out, I can give you directions to find it. Yeah, so this is one of many ways that we're integrating archaeology into the course offerings at Wellesley. So I also teach courses about digital archaeology, especially with Egypt and Sudan. And student responses have been very positive towards this whole experience. In particular, students they get to be part of, very integral in the process of research and learn to care about the process as much as the product, and how to incorporate their own interests and be creative in their classwork. And you can see that we've had a ton of collaborators here at Wellesley, the library, geosciences in particular, and many students have helped us so far in the project, and I want to thank them all. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, about how many students in the building at the time?
About somewhere between 150 and 200.
And then the other question I had is, it looked like when you were showing where you were going to do your 4 initial gigs,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them were, I guess, in the direction of the lake, but outside the footprint of the building.
Oh, yeah.
Is that because they bulldozed down that way, or
Here, let me...
did I interpret the direction wrong?
Part of it is also taking into consideration that we're right next to student storm rooms. Let's see. Yeah, so these were sort of to test my alignment of the building. So this is where we thought that the footprint was, but I wanted to kind of capture here and here and here and here to see if that's actually, if my hypothesis was correct. Like, was it closer to the lake or further back? And some of it just has to do with what we can physically access now. So this is all under Claflin, and this is paved, so this is open. Similarly here, we were kind of hiding in the bushes because we didn't want to disturb students too much, but then we found that, yeah, we would have to work in the middle of the courtyard. So similarly, we would like to excavate right here, but it's right outside someone's room, which they probably would not be so happy about. So we're kind of, it's kind of compromising with what's currently there and accessible. Yeah.
Well, you kind of 2 questions. Could you tell us how deep you've gone so far? Mm-hmm. And also, could you talk to us a little bit about modern excavation techniques like radiographs or X-rays?
Yeah, so far we've gotten to a depth of 1 meter. It's sort of an exercise in calculating efficiency. So if you have a 1 by 1 meter unit, you can move faster or get further down in kind of a limited amount of time, but then the soil becomes less stable, so then you have to open it out bigger. So that's what we're doing on the top of Severance Hill now. We've gone from 1 to 2 meters, so we can go down further. To me, the modern excavation techniques, one of the most interesting things is the combination of remote sensing using satellite imagery, especially anything that has kind of ground penetrating abilities, like in the infrared. So for example, for my work in Sudan, I'm working with a landscape archaeologist at the University of Vienna who he's looking at these remote sensing kind of like large scale resources, and then I know kind of what's been surveyed on the ground, and that helps you narrow down huge amounts of land and kind of identify where the best potential is for excavation. Yeah, so it's as good as you can get as to actually seeing underground in enormous amounts of land, and also through vegetation. So for example, in kind of the Mayan region, people have recently done LiDAR and been able to map out very large kind of settlement networks that would not be able to be seen through the jungle otherwise. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a very interesting class, and it's eye-opening to have this community-based, participatory approach. It's my first anthropology class. I found it very fun. My question is theoretically speaking, in terms of goals for anthropology, what's the difference and commonality compared with the discipline of history?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. And so this project is part of historical archaeology, which is interesting and something I run into when working with Egyptian material too, where you have a textual record, and then you have kind of the material record, and the questions you can ask have a lot of overlap, but the actual methodologies are different. So, for example, there's the kind of archive part of our research draws from history, so looking at kind of comprehensive sets of letters, things that are kind of more kind of conversational and less official record, but then also, I'm trying to think of like bulletins from the college and kind of the official quotes in the newspapers from the time, for example. So that is sort of written from the perspective of the people who are producing the writing. But for example, a lot of my students are very interested about the relationship like with the servants that were here at the time, and were they a lot of young women who are the same age as the students but came from different economic backgrounds and what their experiences were like. But we can't find really any textual information about that in the archives, so we would have to rely on kind of the material evidence that's left. So it's sort of parallel lines of evidence that are in conversation with each other. Maybe the same themes can be addressed by them, but with archaeology, it's sort of like a chance to look through somebody's garbage and see maybe what they didn't want you to know about them. Yeah. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
Tell us some more of your travel adventures.
Let's see. So I have worked in Northeast Africa. The first time I did excavations there was 2006. And during that time, I've been incredibly kind of moved by how welcoming people are, even in very rural areas of Egypt and Sudan. So for example, my parents really wish I went into something like, I'm from California. They're like, why don't you go into Californian archaeology? I said, no, I want to work where there's amazing golden jewelry and mummies and stuff like that instead. So they were worried about me. But then everywhere I've gone, in Sudan I was traveling by myself and I could not get lost if I wanted to. People would stop and make sure, like, what are you doing here? How are you? Do you want to come in and have tea? I've been forced to eat more cookies and cake and than you could ever, and they're little fried kind of donut hole things. So actually a big part of being an archaeologist is getting a chance to experience that kind of hospitality and connect with people that you wouldn't have the chance to otherwise just as like a casual tourist. And also it's important to be able to eat a lot of tasty things because it's rude to say no. I know, for example, I can eat 5 hard-boiled eggs in one sitting if necessary. So, any other questions? Great, well thank you all for coming out this morning.